So in the 1960s, Americans embraced the very progressive belief that new ideas are better than old ideas. Said another way, Americans became persuaded that ideas evolved over time into better and better ideas, like species supposedly, according to Darwinism, evolve over time into better and better species. The Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes says that's simply not true. Ecclesiastes 1:9 says, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Now, the author of Ecclesiastes obviously wasn't referring to technologies, because technology changes over time and always has. He was referring to the principles that inform proper living, including the principles that govern the proper raising of a child. Prior to the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, we were a society, a culture, informed for the most part by tradition. And that was especially true concerning issues regarding family, marriage, and child rearing. In the raising of children, parents honored their mothers and fathers, meaning that with rare exception, they raised their children the way they themselves had been raised. That is, they raised their children in accord with child-rearing principles and traditions that had been passed reliably from generation to generation for several thousands of years. Prior to the 1960s, parents who felt they needed parenting advice sought it not from people with capital letters after their names, but from respected elders in their extended families, their churches, or their communities. The educational level of the elder in question was irrelevant. It just didn't matter. What mattered was the person's wisdom, which is gained not through formal academic training, education, but through life experience. The setting for such advice giving was usually the older person's kitchen or living room. No appointment was necessary and the advice was free. Most important, these elders did not dispense newfangled ideas. Their advice reflected millennia-old understandings concerning children, human nature, and parental responsibilities. Progressivism, which had been slowly gaining steam since the early 1900s, changed all of that. As this new secular worldview took hold, Americans began subscribing to the utopian belief that for any problem, including problems of everyday living, there was a technology, a scientific methodology that would solve it. Consequently, Americans began looking to highly educated professional technocrats called experts to help them improve every aspect of their lives, including diet, physical fitness, spirituality, finances, relationships, thought processes, recreation, relaxation, marriage, and, parenting. One of the more unfortunate aspects of this new trend was that reliance on expert advice began to replace not only the advisory role of the elder in culture, it also began to replace common sense. In the 1960s, professional parenting experts arose from academia, pediatric medicine, and the mental health professions, especially psychology, believing that people with impressive credentials must know what they're talking about. American parents began following the advice that was coming from these new parenting Pied Pipers. The people in question were not, and still are not, necessarily elders. In some cases, their own lives and families are a far cry from the ideals they espouse, and their advice is hardly free. In fact, it has come at a terrible price for America's children, parents, families, schools, And for all those reasons, it's come at a terrible price for America itself. I'm eminently qualified to comment on this postmodern phenomenon because I am widely regarded as a parenting expert. But as you will see, the advice I give is not the sort dispensed by most folks in my profession. I make no bones about that and certainly don't apologize for it. As one might expect, professional parenting experts came up with new ideas without any, and let me emphasize that, without any supporting evidence, zero, none. They claimed that traditional, old-fashioned, if you will, parenting was bad for children, that it damaged their psyches and turned them into fearful, unquestioning robots. Mind you, these new experts made this up. They snatched these bogus claims out of thin air. They didn't do any research to determine whether what they were saying was true. They just thought up new ideas, decided on their own that their new ideas were better than the old ideas, and determined to go about selling them to American parents. Their marketing strategy, it was brilliant, actually, was to persuade parents that if they raised their kids the old-fashioned way, they would do them devastating and irreparable psychological harm. By demonizing traditional parenting in this disingenuous fashion, they were able to market themselves as the solution to a problem that didn't even exist. The fact is that the mental health of children in America was at least 10 times better before American parents began taking their marching orders from professional experts. Just think about that for a second. Before American parents began taking their marching orders from professional experts, the mental health of children in America was at least 10 times better. What does that tell you? Because of the successful selling of these new ideas, America came to a fork in the parenting road in the late 1960s, a fork that no culture had ever before arrived at. To borrow from poet Robert Frost's most famous poem, American parenting took the road never traveled, and indeed, as Frost predicted, it has made all the difference. In the 1950s, there were a handful of parenting books in the marketplace. Today, Amazon lists over 100,000 parenting books, almost all of which reflect the new parenting ideas that were introduced in the 1960s. America is now more than 50 years into this new parenting experiment. The question becomes, has it worked out? Are children better off? Has professional parenting advice made the raising of children easier than it was when grandmothers were the go-to experts? And the answer to all three questions is an unequivocal no. When parents began putting the new parenting ideas into place in the late 1960s, the mental health of children began to decline and has been steadily declining ever since. When compared with children in the 1950s, the decade I was raised, today's child is a whopping 10 times more likely by age 16 to experience a serious emotional setback. Depression and anxiety are epidemic among today's teens. As of year 2022, nearly 10 million children, ranging from as young as 2 up to age 18, are taking psychiatric medications for a variety of emotional and behavioral problems, a staggering number that increases daily. Child and teen suicide was extremely rare in the 1950s. Today, suicide is the second leading cause of death for adolescents. Mind you, This precipitous decline, train wreck, in child mental health began to occur in the late 1960s. At the same time, American parents began listening to mental health professionals like me tell them how to raise kids. And child mental health has been steadily worsening ever since. Having established that new ideas have not been good for children, let's now consider the impact of new child-rearing ideas on parents. Have new ideas made the raising of children easier? Do today's parents feel they're doing a better job than their grandparents did? Again, the answer to both questions is no. In the 1950s and before, the raising of a child was generally regarded as relatively simple, straightforward. It was a big responsibility, yes, but it was rare, very rare, in fact, to find a parent who agonized over or was perpetually stressed out by the process. Not so today. Today, according to personal testimony I've collected over the years from literally thousands of parents, the raising of even one child is often experienced, especially by mothers, as the single most difficult, stressful, anxiety-arousing, and guilt-ridden thing they've ever done in their lives. As a class, women with children are taking a disproportionate amount of the psychiatric medications dispensed for adult depression and anxiety disorders. While not all of those problems are related to child rearing, it is nonetheless accurate to say that raising children has become, over the past 50 years, a negative influence on the mental health of the American mother. Mind you, children have not changed over that same 50-year period. Every child ever born since the beginning of human history has carried the same nature into the world with him or her. And history confirms that raising children is not generally difficult. There have always been exceptions, but that is historically the general rule. Now, to that statement, someone will say, "But John, times have changed." Yes, they have. But then again, times have always changed. It's called progress. And progress has been going on since the dawn of civilization. No. Changing times do not explain a staggering drop in child mental health in merely 50 years. Changing times do not explain the tremendous stress so many of today's moms feel themselves to be under. Consider three things. First, as technology and demographics and politics changed over the years, as empires came and went, there's no evidence that child rearing changed. People living in the Middle East 2,000 or 3,000 years ago didn't raise their kids one way when the Persians reigned supreme, and then another way when the Greeks were in charge, and yet another way when the Romans took over. Quite the contrary. Even though nearly everything else was changing, the understandings regarding the family did not change. People continued to raise kids the way they themselves had been raised. Second, there's no evidence over time that child rearing became progressively more and more difficult. Third, where traditional parenting is still practiced in third world countries and certain traditional communities right here in America, parents aren't complaining of how hard it is to raise kids, and the mental health of children, furthermore, is still good to excellent. The inescapable conclusion, folks, is that parenting advice from mental health professionals has been bad. I mean, really bad. In fact, it's been worse than just bad. It's been downright toxic. It's been harmful to parents. It's been harmful to children. It's been harmful to schools. It's been harmful to culture. How can this be explained? Very simple. The advice has been wrong. And not just a bit wrong, but dead wrong. Let's examine some key aspects of it. Beginning in the late 1960s, the experts said that high self-esteem, holding oneself in high regard, thinking that you are wonderful and worthy in every way, is a good thing, and that parents and schools should do everything they could to help kids develop it. They made this claim, as usual, without a shred of supporting evidence. In other words, they made it up, which is a tradition in the field of psychology. Sigmund Freud, for example, the so-called father of psychology, all he did was make stuff up. He didn't do any research, he just thought up new ideas, all of which, by the way, have since been proven wrong. Taking their cue from Freud, seeing that he had great success making people believe that things he simply made up were true, people in the mental health field have been making stuff up ever since. Their claims about high self-esteem are but one example. Okay, so now, more than 50 years after the mental health community began promoting the supposed benefits of high self-esteem, the research has been done. Amazingly enough, that research finds not one redeeming aspect to high self-esteem. Yes, people with high self-esteem do feel good about themselves, but so what? The issue is not how a person feels about himself. The issue is how that person treats other people. And people with high self-esteem don't score well in that department. Researchers have found, for example, that people with high self-esteem regard for themselves have low regard for others. They are highly prone to manipulative, opportunistic, exploitative, and often abusive behavior in relationships. They may be the life of the party, but people with high self-esteem are not, as a group, trustworthy. They'll smile in your face and then stab you in the back. They don't care about you. All they care about is themselves, advancing themselves. Along these lines, researchers have discovered that violent criminals, as a group, possess the highest opinions of themselves of any demographic. Coming in a close second are men who physically abuse women. People with high self-esteem want their own way and will do just about anything to get it. Psychologists said high self-esteem would promote higher achievement levels in school. Take, for example, California family psychologist Dorothy Briggs, author of one of the best-selling parenting books of all time, Your Child's Self-Esteem, first published in 1970. Here's what she had to say about self-esteem. And by the way, her book was a bestseller for years. She said, if your child has high self-esteem, he has it made. This is a quote from her book. If your child has high self-esteem, he has it made. The key to inner peace and happy living is high self-esteem, for it lies behind successful involvement with others. Now we know that Briggs was completely wrong about the effects of high self-esteem on social relationships and academic performance. The fact is, people with high regard for themselves may feel they have it made in the shade, but they're not the sort of people one wants to be in a long-term relationship with. Nonetheless, Briggs had great success being the chief propagandist for this destructive concept, and largely as a result of her efforts. The notion that high self-esteem was a highly desirable personal attribute rooted itself deeply in American parenting culture. Contrary to the propaganda, people with high self-esteem do not tend to put forth their best effort on tasks. They're much more likely to do just enough to get by. Why? Because they believe anything they do is worthy of merit. That is, after all, what their parents and teachers have told them. that anything and everything they do is great, wonderful, amazing, awesome. When you believe that anything you do is worthy of merit, you don't put your best foot forward. You don't give a task your best effort. Psychologists said high self-esteem would improve the mental health of children. That's been a total bust. But why? Why has it been a bust? Because people with high self-esteem generally possess a low level of what is called emotional resilience. As a consequence, they don't deal with setbacks, which everybody experiences, right? Very well at all. They are prone to collapsing emotionally when the going gets tough. They don't deal well with disappointment, failure, and crisis. They believe in a fantasy, which is that because they're such great, awesome people, they deserve nothing but good stuff to come their way. And folks, when you believe that, you're in for a big fall. That goes a long way toward explaining why the mental health of today's kids is in crisis, why child and teen depression has skyrocketed over the past few decades. As a leading researcher into the effects of self-esteem has said, we've done a good job as a culture of promoting high self-esteem in kids, but the result has been calamitous. Well, so much for humanistic psychology. Now let's take a look at one of the other major psychological theories that's had a big impact on parenting. I'm talking about behavioral modification theory. Mental health professionals said behavior modification was the answer to any and all discipline problems. That discipline was a simple matter of manipulating reward and punishment properly. Has that worked out? No. Today's parents and teachers are having more problems with discipline than parents and teachers in the 1950s and before could have even imagined. Why is that? Well, one reason, a big reason in fact, is because today's parents and teachers are using disciplinary approaches that work very well on dogs, rats, pigeons, and even creatures as small as amoeba, but don't work well at all on human beings. The fact is that where human beings are concerned, rewards and punishments often backfire. They often make matters worse. Many of you watching this video have already discovered that. You simply refuse to accept the evidence. This may surprise, even shock you to learn, but it's a fact that not one psychological theory concerning human nature has ever been proven true. The centerpiece of humanistic theory is the notion that high self-esteem is virtually an entitlement, that it's a deserved positive attribute that if spread around will make the world into a social and cultural utopia where everyone loves themselves and loves one another. As I've already pointed out, that's been proven to be a bust. High self-esteem is the root cause of lots and lots of interpersonal, social, and emotional problems. It's not a solution. Likewise, behavior modification theories applied to humans has also been a complete bust. Instead of being a disciplinary panacea, it has contributed to a general worsening of discipline problems, both at home and in the classroom. The third of the three major schools of psychological thought is the Freudian school. The name refers to a person I've already mentioned, 19th century Austrian psychologist Sigmund Freud. Freudian theory, which boils down to the absolutely absurd notion that parenting produces the person, is unsupported by either research or common sense. Everyone knows of people who were raised very well by good people who turned out badly, and everyone knows of people who were raised badly who turned out quite well. In short, the humanists were wrong, the behaviorists were wrong, the Freudians were wrong. Psychology consists of one wrong idea after another. No wonder psychology has not made children happier or child-rearing easier. The bottom line, folks, is that believing the experts has been a disaster, train wreck, for parents, children, schools. It's been an unmitigated disaster for everyone. It's been a disaster for America. After 50 plus years of this psychological parenting experiment, it's clear that what I call postmodern psychological parenting hasn't worked, isn't working, and isn't going to work. Doesn't even matter how hard you work at it. It's a train wreck. Because American parents and teachers believed that people with capital letters after their names knew what they were talking about, the mental health of children is deteriorated, and the simple act of raising a child has become a highly stressful, anxiety-ridden process. As one very well-educated professional woman told me, "John, if I had known how difficult it was to raise children, I would never have had any." Now, that's just sad. Unfortunately, many mothers have expressed the same thought to me privately. They won't express it publicly, and they certainly won't express it around other mothers. So the first big parenting mistake in this series is believing that the so-called experts know what they're talking about. What are the parenting symptoms of believing the experts? How do you know that you're caught in their ever frightening? Frightening, yes, it's frightening. So the first big parenting mistake in this series is believing that the so-called experts know what they're talking about. What are the parenting symptoms of believing the experts? How do you know that you're caught in their ever-tightening web of psychobabble? First, you read a lot of parenting materials. There's a stack of parenting books on your bedside table. You consult these books on a regular basis. You probably subscribe to a parenting magazine so you can stay abreast of the latest expert babbling. Reading the sort of parenting garbage I'm talking about, and believe me, folks, most of it's nothing but garbage, causes parents, and especially moms, who are without doubt the primary consumers of parenting materials, to worry, to be anxious, to feel guilty about what they've done and haven't done, and to always feel like they're falling short of the mark. The second symptom, you regularly discuss what you're reading with your friends. Parenting is on your mind a lot. You're constantly evaluating yourself against what these books and articles say you shouldn't and should be doing. The third symptom, you worry a lot about whether you're doing the right thing and whether your kids are okay. You're constantly looking for signs in your children's behavior that something is amiss. You begin to worry because in the course of reading the psychobabble, it's more accurately called parenting babble, you let what I call psychological boogeymen into your head. These boogeymen convince you that one wrong move, one mistake on your part is going to ruin your child's life, ruin his chances for success. That one mistake on your part is going to have catastrophic consequences of one sort or another in his life. The more you read the junk advice in question, the more psychological boogeymen you let into your head, and the less clearly you think. As these boogeymen scrabble about in a parent's head, they drown out the quiet, calming voice of common sense. And finally, as a result of letting these boogeymen into your head, you experience the raising of children to be difficult, stressful, anxiety-arousing, and so on. You're a parenting basket case, or close to it, much of the time. So, what is the solution? The solution is to restore one family at a time, traditional, non-psychological, commonsensical child rearing to America. The solution is for parents to stop listening to the experts and start listening to their hearts. The voice of common sense. By subscribing to this video series, you've decided to do exactly that. Well, that's the end of this first segment in the series, The 7 Biggest Mistakes Parents Make and How to Stop Making Them. Now it's time for you to do your homework, which for this video segment is very simple. Just take a long vacation, maybe even a permanent vacation from reading parenting books and magazines. I'm serious, by the way. Make a promise to yourself that while you're watching this video series, you will read no parenting books or magazines. I know that's an ironic thing for me to say, given that I've written a whopping 20 parenting books. Nonetheless, I know for a fact that to get back in touch with your common sense concerning children, you need to stop reading the toxic stuff in question. If you're going to read stuff that helps you get in touch with your common sense ability to do a good job of raising your kids, stuff that doesn't cause you to worry. You're going to know when you're reading something that's commonsensical. As I said in the introduction to this series, the only parents who are watching are ones who love their kids and want the best for them. And that would include you, which means that in the final analysis, your common sense is going to guide you well. Hopefully your spouse is watching this series with you. If not, get him or her to watch separately, if that's more convenient. But make sure you discuss together what you've learned. Then when you feel ready, sign on again. Click on segment 2, which deals with another big parenting mistake, giving reasons and explanations to children. See you again soon. In the meantime, happy parenting to you.